The fluorescent lights of St. Michael's Hospital emergency room hummed their familiar drone at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday night that would change everything. Catherine Brennan had heard that sound for 22 years. 10,000 shifts, countless lives, saved more deaths than she cared to remember. But she'd never heard silence
Doctor,
like
the patient's O2 sat is dropping.
Hello, is he
The
responsive?
ambulance
It's
bay
88
doors
and falling.
exploded
He's
open.
confused.
Get the crash cart
Incoming
now.
multiple traumas
You must
from
listen
Fort
to me
Sheridan
right
6.
now.
Critical.
We don't have time for
Kat's hands
hesitation.
stilled over the
Act
supply
now
cart
or the
she'd been
patient won't
restocking.
survive.
Her green eyes tracked the chaos with the calm of someone who'd seen it all before. Red auburn hair pulled back tight. Scrubs faded from too many washes. Wedding ring still on her left hand, though the man who gave it to her had been dead for 18 years. The first gurney crashed through, pushed by two paramedics running at full sprint. Sergeant Liam Torres, 24 years old, multiple trauma training accident at Fort Sheridan. But Kat was already moving. Not running. She never ran. Declan had taught her that. Marines don't run toward chaos, they walk with purpose. Panic spreads. Calm saves lives. She reached the trauma bay as they transferred the young soldier onto the bed. His face was gray. Blood soaked through the field dressings on his chest and abdomen. The monitors screamed numbers that made the residents freeze. Blood pressure, 60/40. Heart rate, 160. Oxygen saturation, 79%. Someone paged trauma surgery. Get me 4 units of O negative. Where's the attending? We need the attending. Dr. Brandon Ashford appeared in the doorway. Pristine white coat over designer scrubs, looking like he'd just stepped out of a medical journal photo shoot rather than a life or death emergency. 35 years old, 6 months out of his fellowship at Johns Hopkins, and the son of Richard Ashford, the pharmaceutical billionaire who chaired the hospital board. What do we have? His voice carried the bored confidence of someone who'd never doubted himself. The resident stammered through the report. Multiple penetrating trauma, internal bleeding, vitals crashing. Kat worked while they talked. Started the IVs, got the blood running, placed the monitors. Her hands moved with the efficiency of 10,000 repetitions. She didn't need to think. Her body knew what to do. He's agitated, Ashford said, watching the soldier's restless movements. We need to sedate him before we can assess properly. Give him midazolam, 150 milligrams IV push. Kat's hand stopped. 150 milligrams. She looked at the patient, young, lean, maybe 165 pounds at most. The math was automatic in her head. Weight-based dosing for midazolam was 0.02 to 0.05 milligrams per kilogram. For this patient, that meant 5 to 7.5 milligrams for sedation. Maybe up to 75 milligrams in extreme cases. 150 would stop his breathing. Doctor? Her voice was quiet, respectful. The patient's weight is approximately 165 pounds. Recommended dosage for midazolam at that weight would be 75 milligrams maximum. 150 could cause respiratory. Ashford turned to her slowly, his eyes narrowed. I'm sorry, did you just question my order? Around them, the ER went quiet. Residents stopped moving. Nurses looked down at their feet. Everyone knew what was happening. Everyone had seen it before. I'm recommending protocol, doctor. Kat kept her voice level. Patient safety protocols indicate I graduated at the top of my class from Johns Hopkins. Ashford's voice rose. I completed my fellowship in emergency medicine at Mass General. Are you seriously questioning my medical judgment with your, what, associate's degree from some community college? Kat felt the heat rise to her face but kept her expression neutral. Declan's voice echoed in her memory. Stay calm. Emotion clouds judgment. State facts. I'm a registered nurse with 22 years of ER experience, doctor. The dosage you've ordered is twice the maximum safe range for this patient's weight. I'm required by protocol to advocate for patient safety, and I have concerns about an order. You're required to follow orders. Ashford stepped closer. There's a hierarchy in medicine. I'm the physician. You're the nurse. I make the decisions. You execute them. That's how this works. Not when the decision could kill the patient. The words came out before she could stop them. Quiet, firm, absolute. Ashford's face flushed red. Excuse me? 150 milligrams of midazolam in a patient this size will cause respiratory depression, possibly respiratory arrest. I cannot in good conscience administer a medication I believe will harm the patient. For a moment, no one breathed. Then Ashford smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Jessica, he turned to a young nurse standing near the medication cart. 23 years old, maybe 6 months out of nursing school, Jessica Palmer. Kat had been mentoring her, teaching her, trying to build her confidence. Now the girl looked terrified. Yes, doctor. Draw up 150 milligrams of midazolam IV push. Now. Jessica's eyes darted to Kat. Help me, that look said. Tell me what to do. Kat wanted to tell her to refuse, to stand her ground, to do what was right regardless of the cost. But she'd learned something in 22 years. You couldn't make people be brave. They had to choose it themselves. Jessica, Kat said quietly, you have to make your own choice. Look at the patient. Look at his weight. Look at the dosing guidelines. Then decide what you can live with. Jessica's hands shook as she drew up the medication. The syringe trembled. She walked to the bedside, looked at the IV port, looked at Kat, then pushed the medication. The effect was almost immediate. Sergeant Torres's breathing, already labored, began to slow. His oxygen saturation, already low, started dropping. 80%, 75, 70. The respiratory alarm screamed. He's crashing, someone yelled. Ashford froze, just stood there staring at the monitors like he couldn't process what was happening. Kat didn't freeze. She grabbed the ambu bag from the wall, pushed past Ashford, positioned herself at the head of the bed, tilted the patient's airway open, started bagging. Someone call respiratory. Get me the crash cart. I need a 14-gauge angiocath for needle decompression now. Her voice cut through the panic, calm, authoritative, the voice of someone who'd done this before, who knew exactly what to do when everything went to hell. For 3 minutes she worked alone, bagged the patient, assessed his chest, found the tension building in his left lung, performed the needle decompression that released the pressure and let his remaining lung expand. The oxygen saturation climbed. 85, 90, 92. Sergeant Torres gasped. A real breath, deep and ragged but real. The alarms quieted. Kat stepped back, stripped off her gloves, documented what she'd done in the chart with quick, precise notes. Time, assessment, intervention, response. She didn't look at Ashford, but she heard him, his voice low and venomous. You just assaulted my patient. You performed a medical procedure without physician authorization. That's practicing medicine without a license. Kat turned slowly, met his eyes. I saved your patient's life. After you nearly killed him with an inappropriate medication order. It's all documented in the chart. For a heartbeat, she thought he might hit her. His fists clenched, his jaw worked. Instead, he smiled again, that same cold expression. We'll see about that. He walked out. Kat went back to work, started the blood transfusion, monitored the vitals, waited for the trauma surgeon. Sergeant Torres stabilized. His oxygen stayed above 95. His blood pressure climbed to 90/60. Not great, but alive. 20 minutes later, the trauma team took him to surgery. An hour after that, Rebecca Wallace found Kat in the supply room. Rebecca was 48, 18 years in the ER, one of the few nurses Kat trusted completely. Walsh wants to see you now. Kat nodded. She'd known this was coming. How's Torres? In surgery, doing okay. They think he'll make it. Rebecca paused. Kat Ashford filed a formal complaint, insubordination, practicing medicine without a license, creating a hostile work environment. I saved his patient's life. I know. I was there. I'll testify to that. Rebecca touched her arm. But Kat, the Ashford family donates $20 million to this hospital. Richard Ashford is the board chairman. His son can do whatever he wants. Kat looked at her friend's worried face and felt something cold settle in her chest. Then I guess we'll see if this hospital cares more about money or patients. She walked to Patricia Walsh's office. The administrative director's office was all corporate polish. Motivational posters about teamwork and excellence. Framed photos of Walsh shaking hands with donors and politicians. A desk that cost more than Kat made in 3 months. Walsh sat behind it looking uncomfortable. Catherine, sit down. Kat remained standing. I'd rather not. Walsh sighed, rubbed her temples. This is difficult. What's difficult? Dr. Ashford has filed a formal complaint against you. Multiple violations of hospital protocol. Insubordination. Performing medical procedures without physician authorization. Creating a hostile work environment that undermines patient care. Kat's jaw tightened. I prevented a medication error that would have killed a patient. Everything I did was within my scope of practice as a registered nurse. I documented my assessment, my concerns, and my interventions. It's all in the chart. Walsh looked away. That's not the issue here. Then what is the issue? Silence was Catherine. Walsh finally met her eyes. The Ashford family is donating $20 million to build our new oncology wing. We broke ground last month. Construction has already started. The board cannot afford to jeopardize that relationship. The words hit like a physical blow. You're choosing money over patient safety. I'm choosing the hospital's survival. Walsh's voice hardened. We serve thousands of patients. That $20 million oncology center will save hundreds of lives over the next decade. You're asking me to sacrifice all of that because you couldn't follow a simple order. The order would have killed him. That's a matter of medical judgment. Dr. Ashford is a board-certified emergency physician with an excellent education and training record. You're a nurse. You don't have the training or authority to override his clinical decisions. Kat stared at this woman she'd worked with for 8 years. Someone she'd thought had integrity. Someone she'd thought cared about doing the right thing. So that's it. You're firing me. Walsh pulled out a folder, slid it across the desk. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. Gross insubordination. Violation of medical protocols. You'll receive 2 weeks severance pay. Your health insurance will continue for 30 days. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings. Kat didn't touch the folder. There were 2 other nurses fired in the past 6 months, both for conflicts with Dr. Ashford. Are you going to tell me those were coincidences too? Walsh's expression flickered. Guilt, maybe, or just irritation at being questioned. Those were separate personnel matters. I can't discuss them. Because you covered them up the same way you're covering this up. I'm not covering anything up. I'm making a difficult decision for the good of the hospital. Kat finally picked up the folder, looked at the termination letter inside, 22 years of service, 10,000 shifts, countless lives saved, reduced to 2 weeks severance pay. You know what the worst part is? She looked Walsh in the eyes. I don't even think you're a bad person. I think you're just scared. Scared of losing money. Scared of losing your dome. So scared that you'll sacrifice anyone to protect yourself. She turned toward the door. Catherine. Kat stopped but didn't turn around. I am sorry, truly, but this is how the world works. The sooner you accept that, the better. Kat walked out. Security was already waiting, a young guard who looked embarrassed. He walked her to her locker, watched while she emptied it into a cardboard box. 22 years fit into one box. Extra scrubs, a coffee mug Molly had given her for Christmas. Photos, her stethoscope, the good one Declan had bought her when she graduated nursing school. She walked out through the ER, past residents who wouldn't meet her eyes, past nurses who looked away, past the trauma bays where she'd saved thousands of lives. Only Rebecca followed her to the parking lot. Kat, I'm so sorry. If there's anything I can do, take care of Jessica. She's going to blame herself for this. Make sure she knows it wasn't her fault. Where will you go? Kat looked up at the hospital. 7 stories of glass and steel and broken promises. Home, I need to figure out how to tell my daughter her college tuition just disappeared. She drove through Chicago's empty streets at 3 in the morning. The city looked different at this hour. Quieter, lonelier. She'd always loved these drives home after night shifts. The sense of having survived another battle, of having made a difference. Now she just felt numb. Her apartment was on the north side, 2 bedrooms in an old building with radiator heat and windows that rattled in winter. She'd lived here since Declan died. Couldn't afford anything better on a nurse's salary. But it was home. She unlocked the door, turned on the lights. The living room walls were covered in photos. Her wedding day, she'd been 22. Declan 24, both of them so young and certain the world made sense. Declan in his marine dress blues, his purple heart in a shadow box. The folded American flag from his funeral. Molly as a baby, Molly as a toddler. Molly in her West Point uniform standing at attention so much like her father, it made Kat's chest ache. The last photo was the hardest to look at. Taken in 2006. Kat, Declan, and 10-month-old Molly. A family photo, the last one before Declan deployed to Iraq. He'd been killed 4 months later. IED outside Fallujah, March 15, 2007. Molly had been 11 months old. She had no memories of her father, only stories Kat told her. Kat sat at the kitchen table, opened her laptop, checked her bank account, $6,200. West Point tuition was covered by various scholarships and military survivor benefits, but there were still fees. Housing, books, personal expenses, $4,800 due in 3 weeks. After that, she'd have $1,300 left. Rent was $1,400 a month. She could survive maybe 2 months. 3 if she cut everything to the bone. Then what? Her phone buzzed. Video call from Molly. Kat almost didn't answer. Didn't want her daughter to see her like this. But Molly would know something was wrong if she didn't pick up. She pressed accept. Molly's face filled the screen. 19 years old, red hair like her mother, green eyes like her father, wearing her gray West Point sweatshirt. She was grinning. Mom, you won't believe what happened in navigation today. We had to do this night exercise where... She stopped. Mom, what's wrong? Kat tried to smile. Failed. Nothing, sweetheart. Just tired. Tell me about the exercise. Mom. Molly's voice went flat, military flat. I'm Dad's daughter. I can see through your bullshit. What happened? Kat's composure cracked. Just a little. Just enough. I got fired tonight. Silence on the other end. Then what way? Kat told her. All of it. The medication order, the patient crashing, the save, the termination. Molly listened without interrupting. That was Declan's training too. Gather all the intelligence before you react. When Kat finished, Molly's face was white. I'm withdrawing from West Point. Absolutely not. Mom, I can get a job. I can help with... Molly Brennan, you listen to me. Kat used her command voice, the one that didn't allow argument. Your father died so you could have opportunities, so you could serve, so you could be something more than a widow trying to figure out how to pay rent. You are staying at West Point. That's not up for discussion. Molly's eyes filled with tears. But Mom, your father told me something before he deployed. He said, when you get knocked down, you get back up. You fight. You keep fighting until there's nothing left to fight for. I'm not done fighting, Molly. I have options. I'll figure this out. But you keep studying. You keep training. You make your father proud. Deal. Molly wiped her eyes, nodded. Deal. But Mom, Dad would be proud of you. What you did tonight, saving that soldier, standing up to that doctor. That's exactly what he would have done. After they hung up, Kat finally let herself cry. She sat at the kitchen table in the dark and cried for her husband who died fighting for what he believed in, for her daughter who was trying so hard to be strong, for 22 years of service that had been erased with a termination letter, for a system so broken that money mattered more than lives. Then she wiped her eyes, made coffee, opened her laptop again. If they thought she was going to disappear quietly, they were wrong. She logged into the hospital's electronic medical records system, used her credentials. IT hadn't deactivated them yet. Found Sergeant Torres's chart, case number 5841. She opened the record, started reading. What she saw made her blood run cold. There were 2 versions. The original time-stamped 11:53 p.m. midazolam, 150 milligrams IV, administered by R.N. Palmer per Dr. Ashford's order. 11:54 p.m. patient experienced respiratory depression. Oxygen saturation dropped to 68%. Code blue called. 11:57 p.m. patient stabilized by R.N. Brennan via needle decompression and manual ventilation. The revised version timestamped 2:15 a.m. 30 minutes after Kat had been fired, midazolam 75 milligrams IV administered. Patient tolerated sedation well. No complications. R.N. Brennan reprimanded for unauthorized medical intervention and insubordination. They'd falsified the medical record, changed the dosage, deleted the code blue, removed all evidence of Ashford's error and Kat's save. Created a narrative where she was the problem, not the solution. Kat took screenshots, downloaded the files, saved everything to an encrypted flash drive. Then she called the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation Board of Nursing. Got voicemail at 4 in the morning. This is Catherine Brennan, RN license number 041285397. I'm filing a formal complaint regarding patient safety violations and falsification of medical records at St. Michael's Hospital in Chicago. The complaint involves, she detailed everything, the medication order, the crash, the save, the termination, the falsified records. I'm submitting documentation with this complaint. Please contact me for additional information. She hung up, called an employment attorney whose number Rebecca had texted her, got voicemail again. This is Catherine Brennan. I was terminated from St. Michael's Hospital tonight in what I believe was retaliation for reporting a patient's safety concern. The hospital has since falsified medical records to cover up the incident. I have documentation. I need legal representation. Please call me back. Finally, she called the last number. Her brother-in-law, Patrick, Declan's younger brother. Army Ranger, now retired, working as a construction contractor in Colorado. He answered on the second ring. Kat, it's 4 in the morning. What's wrong? She told him everything. When she finished, Patrick was quiet for a long moment. So they fired you for saving a kid's life? Yes. And then covered it up? Yes. Kat, listen to me. You need to fight this, not just for you, for everyone who comes after you, for every nurse who's going to face the same choice. I know. But Patrick, I don't have money for lawyers. I don't have time to wait for investigations that take months. I have bills due in 3 weeks. Then we'll figure it out. Your family. Declan would have done anything for you, so will I. After they hung up, Kat sat in the dark kitchen as dawn started breaking over Chicago. She thought about what Declan had said the night before he deployed. Promise me something, Katie. If I don't come back, promise me you'll keep fighting for what's right, even when it costs you everything. She'd kept that promise for 18 years. She wasn't stopping now. At 6:45 a.m., she got a text from an unknown number. Check medical records, case 5841, before they scrub it completely. A friend. Kat's heart raced. Someone inside the hospital was trying to help her. She logged back into the system, downloaded every version of Torres's chart she could find, every note, every order, every timestamp. Then she looked at her termination letter again. Read the fine print. She had 24 hours to collect her personal belongings from the hospital before security would discard them. She needed to go back, not just for her things, for witnesses, for evidence, for the truth that someone was trying to help her find. Kat showered, put on clean scrubs, pulled her hair back, looked at herself in the mirror. She looked tired. 44 years old, lines around her eyes from too many night shifts, but her hands were steady. The same hands that had saved Sergeant Torres. The same hands that had held Declan's when they said their wedding vows. The same hands that had held her daughter the day she was born. Those hands had never failed her. She wasn't going to let them fail her. How? At 7:30 a.m., she drove back to St. Michael's Hospital. The parking lot was already filling up. Day shift arriving, the morning routine, everything normal. Except for the 3 military ambulances parked near the emergency entrance, and the medical helicopter on the roof pad rotors still spinning down. Kat's trained eyes saw it immediately. Something was wrong, something big. She walked toward the ER entrance. Rebecca burst through the doors, spotted her, ran over. Kat, oh, thank God you're here. Rebecca, I was fired. I'm just here to collect my... Kat, please. We have a mass casualty event. Helicopter collision during training at Fort Sheridan. 8 critical patients incoming. We're completely understaffed. Dr. Ashford called in sick. We only have 4 nurses and Dr. Gardner, who's been in attending for 6 weeks. People are going to die if we don't have enough hands. Kat looked past Rebecca, saw the chaos inside. Gurneys being prepared, staff running, alarms already sounding. She thought about the termination letter in her purse, the lawsuit she was planning, the fight ahead of her. Then she thought about 8 soldiers who needed help. Just until day shift is fully staffed. 2 hours. Rebecca grabbed her hand. Thank you. They ran inside together. Trauma Bay 3, the worst case. Sergeant Marcus Fletcher, 23 years old. Multiple penetrating trauma from helicopter rotor blade fragments. Blood pressure dropping. Internal bleeding. Oxygen saturation in the 70s. The young attending Dr. Emma Gardner stood frozen, hands shaking, eyes wide. Where's the someone get me a central line kit? Kat pushed past her, took position at the head of the bed. Her hands moved automatically. Check airway, assess breathing, start IVs, hang blood. Rebecca, I need 2 large bore IVs, Jessica type and cross for 6 units. Activate massive transfusion protocol. Dr. Gardner, he needs a chest tube left side 5th intercostal space. Dr. Gardner stared at her. I've never placed one without supervision. Then I'll talk you through it. But we do it now or he dies. For the next 35 minutes, Kat essentially ran 3 trauma bays simultaneously. Directed doctors, placed lines, caught complications before they became catastrophes. Saved lives with the skill of someone who'd done this 10,000 times before. Sergeant Fletcher stabilized. All 8 patients survived a surgery. At 7:45, the day shift arrived in force. More nurses, more doctors. The crisis was over. Kat quietly slipped away, headed toward the locker room. That's when she heard it. Military boots, steady and rhythmic, coming down the hallway. Everyone stopped, turned, watched. Colonel Garrett Holloway appeared around the corner. 52 years old. Special Forces tab, Ranger tab, Combat Infantry badge, Silver Star, Bronze Star with Valor. Face weathered from 3 decades of service. Gray hair cut high and tight. Eyes that had seen things civilians couldn't imagine. He walked with a slight limp, old combat wound, but there was nothing weak about him. He radiated authority like other men radiated heat. He approached the reception desk. The receptionist looked up, saw the rank, sat up straighter. "Can I help you, sir?" Holloway's voice was quiet, but it carried. The kind of voice that had commanded men in combat, that had ordered soldiers into situations where some wouldn't come back. "I'm looking for Nurse Catherine Brennan." The receptionist's fingers flew over her keyboard. Her face fell. "I'm sorry, sir, but Miss Brennan is no longer..." "No longer what?" Patricia Walsh appeared from her office. Must have heard the commotion. "Colonel, I'm Patricia Walsh, Administrative Director. I'm afraid Miss Brennan's employment was terminated yesterday. If you need medical assistance, I can have someone else." Holloway turned to her slowly. His eyes were the coldest thing Kat had ever seen. "Where is my nurse?" The entire emergency room went silent. Not quiet, silent. That voice didn't belong in a hospital. It belonged on a battlefield. It belonged in the kind of place where life and death were decided in seconds, and mercy was a luxury no one could afford. Every staff member froze. Even the alarm seemed quieter. Walsh stammered. "Sir, as I said, she no longer works. The woman who saved my life 7 years ago." Holloway's voice didn't rise, didn't need to. "The woman who sat by my bedside for 14 nights. The woman who taught me what honor looks like. You're telling me she's gone?" Walsh's professional smile cracked. There were performance issues. Performance issues. He said it the way another man might say war crimes or treason. Kat stepped out from the hallway. She'd been listening. Couldn't help it. "Colonel Holloway." He turned. His expression softened. Just barely. Just enough. "Nurse Brennan." And in that moment, standing in the emergency room where she'd just been fired, facing the man whose life she'd saved 7 years ago, Catherine Brennan realized something. This wasn't over. This was just beginning. Colonel Garrett Holloway didn't move. Just stood there in the middle of the emergency room, his presence commanding the space the way a lighthouse commands a harbor. Steady, unmovable, impossible to ignore. Around him, the usual chaos of St. Michael's ER had frozen into something resembling a military formation. Nurses stopped mid-step. Residents held their breath. Even the monitors seemed to beep more quietly, as if the machines themselves recognized authority when they saw it. Kat walked toward him. Her scrubs were splattered with blood from the trauma bays. Her hair had come loose from its tie, red strands falling around her face. She looked exactly like what she was, a nurse who'd just spent 35 minutes in hell saving lives she wasn't even supposed to be saving. "Colonel." She stopped a respectful distance away. Professional, controlled. The way she'd learned to be over 22 years of swallowing her anger and doing her job anyway. "You didn't have to come here." "Yes, I did." His voice dropped lower. Meant for her, not the audience they'd gathered. "Rebecca Wallace called me last night. Told me what happened." Kat shot a look at Rebecca, who stood near Trauma Bay 2 with her arms crossed, not even trying to hide her interference. Rebecca just lifted her chin. No apology in that gesture. Just solidarity between nurses who'd survived too many shifts together to pretend politeness mattered more than loyalty. "It's handled, sir. I don't need Catherine." The way he said her name stopped her. Not Catherine Brennan, RN, not Nurse Brennan, just Catherine. Like she was a person who mattered, not just a medical license number. 7 years ago, I was dying in a bed upstairs. Septic shock, multiple organ failure. The doctors gave me 30% odds. "Do you remember what you told me?" She remembered. God, she remembered all of it. The smell of infection mixing with industrial disinfectant. The steady rhythm of monitors tracking a life slipping away one heartbeat at a time. The long nights when she'd pulled a chair next to his bed because the ICU was understaffed and she couldn't stand the thought of him dying alone. "I told you that surviving wasn't enough, that you had to decide what you were surviving for. You sat with me for 14 nights. His jaw tightened. 14. You weren't even assigned to me after the first week. You volunteered, came in on your days off, never took overtime pay, just showed up and stayed. Kat felt her throat constrict. She'd done that for dozens of patients over the years. Never expected anyone to remember. Never expected it to matter. "You know what I was surviving for," Holloway continued. Kat shook her head. "My son, Patrick, he was 22 then. Army Ranger just like his old man. Second deployment. I was terrified I'd die before seeing him come home, before seeing him become the man I knew he could be. He paused. You gave me that. 7 more years watching my son lead men. 7 more years of purpose. I got that because of you. You got that because you fought Colonel. You just saved my life. His voice hardened again, not angry at her, angry for her. And yesterday they fired you for doing the same thing for someone else. Patricia Walsh had been standing, frozen near her office door, probably calculating legal exposure and PR damage. Now she found her voice tried to reassert control over a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond her authority. Colonel Holloway, I understand you're upset, but this is a personnel matter. It's confidential. Hospital policy prevents me from discussing. Holloway turned to her. The movement was slow, deliberate, like a gun turret tracking to a new target, mechanical and inevitable. You can't discuss it. Interesting. He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen with deliberate precision. Then maybe you can discuss it with Senator Patrick O'Brien, Armed Services Committee. He's a personal friend. We served together in the 75th Rangers. I called him this morning at 0600, told him about a hospital that receives $47 million annually in Department of Defense contracts. Told him that same hospital receives $28 million in VA funding. Told him that hospital just fired a nurse for preventing a medication error that would have killed an active duty soldier. Walsh's face went from professional mask to chalk white in under 3 seconds. Sir, I don't think threatening. I'm not threatening anything. I'm stating facts. Holloway's voice stayed level. That was somehow worse than shouting. I also called the Inspector General of the Department of Defense and the Veterans Affairs Secretary and 12 other flag officers I served with whose family members have been treated at this hospital. They're all very interested in why a nurse was terminated for advocating patient safety. The silence in the ER was absolute now. Even the patients in the waiting room had stopped complaining. That voice carried weight that transcended rank or position. It was the voice of a man who'd led other men into places where some of them didn't come back, and who'd learned that authority doesn't come from volume, it comes from absolute certainty. But before I make any more calls, Holloway continued, stepping closer to Walsh, I want to hear exactly what happened. From the beginning, every detail. And I want the doctor who filed the complaint here. Right now. Walsh looked like she wanted to argue. Looked like she wanted to call security. Looked like she wanted to invoke hospital policy or patient privacy or any of the bureaucratic shields administrators hid behind when they didn't want to face consequences. But she'd seen what Kat had seen in Holloway's eyes. This wasn't a request. This was the last warning before something much worse happened. I'll call Dr. Ashford. She disappeared into her office. Through the glass walls, they could see her on the phone gesturing frantically, her professional composure shredding like tissue paper in a storm. Holloway turned back to Kat. His expression softened. Just slightly. Just enough. Tell me what happened. All of it. Every detail. So she did. The medication order, the dosage error, Jessica's fear, the patient crashing, the save, the termination that came 3 hours later. Around them, staff members who'd been there nodded along, silent witnesses confirming every word, building a collective testimony that was harder to dismiss than one nurse's complaint. When she finished, Holloway was quiet for a long moment, processing, analyzing. Kat could almost see his tactical mind working through the situation, identifying threats, calculating responses. Show me the patient's chart. Sir, I don't have access anymore. They terminated my credentials. Dr. Gardner. Holloway's voice cut across the room like a blade. The young attending jumped, nearly dropped the tablet she was holding. Pull up the chart for Sergeant Liam Torres, case number 5841, now. Dr. Emma Gardner hesitated, looked at Walsh's office, looked at the other residents, looked at Holloway's face and understood that some orders weren't optional. She logged into the system, found the chart, turned the screen so Holloway could see. He read in silence. His expression didn't change, but Kat saw his jaw tighten, saw the muscle jump in his cheek, saw his hands curl into fists, and then deliberately relax. This says 75 milligrams of midazolam. No complications noted. Patient tolerated sedation well. That's the revised version, Kat said quietly. The original showed 150 milligrams, showed the respiratory arrest, showed the code blue, showed everything. They changed it after they fired me. You have proof, Kat pulled out her phone. Showed him the screenshot she'd taken before IT locked her out completely. The timestamps, the two versions side by side, digital evidence that someone had committed fraud. Holloway studied them with the intensity of a man reading mission orders. Then he looked up at Dr. Gardner. Doctor, is this the only version currently in the system? Dr. Gardner's hands shook slightly as she checked. Her face went pale. Yes, sir, but there should be an audit trail. The electronic medical record system tracks all changes automatically. It's required by federal law. Pull it up. Dr. Gardner's fingers flew over the keyboard, found the audit log, opened it. Her hands started shaking harder. The original entry was made at 11:53 p.m. Thursday by Jessica Palmer, RN. The revision was made at 2:15 a.m. Friday by... She stopped, swallowed hard. By Patricia Walsh, Administrative Override Code. The words hung in the air like smoke after gunfire. Holloway turned toward Walsh's office just as the door opened. Dr. Brandon Ashford walked out looking annoyed and entitled in equal measure. Designer suit under his white coat, hair perfectly styled, the expression of a man who'd never been told no in his entire privileged life. Colonel, I don't appreciate being summoned like some... Tell me about Thursday night. Sergeant Torres. Ashford's expression flickered, irritation mixing with wariness. He'd clearly expected Walsh to handle this quietly, to make it go away with money or lawyers or whatever tools rich people use to erase their mistakes. Routine trauma case, standard protocols. I made appropriate clinical decisions. Nurse Brennan overstepped her authority and created a dangerous situation by, what medication did you order? Midazolam, standard sedation protocol for an agitated trauma patient. Dosage. A pause, just a fraction of a second. But Kat saw it, Holloway saw it, everyone watching saw it. 75 milligrams, appropriate for the patient's clinical presentation. You're lying. Holloway's voice was flat, absolute. The voice of a man who'd interrogated enemy combatants and knew exactly what deception sounded like. The original medical record before your administrative director altered, it shows 150 milligrams, which means either you ordered a dosage that nearly killed a soldier and then covered it up, or you're committing perjury right now in front of 20 witnesses. Which is it, Dr.? Ashford's face flushed red. I don't have to answer to you. You have no authority here. This is a civilian hospital, and I'm a board-certified physician, and you're just somewhat. Holloway stepped closer. Not threatening, just present. Some veteran whose taxes pay for $47 million of your operating budget. Some retired colonel who knows exactly which senators to call. Some man who's personally sent dozens of wounded soldiers to this ER and wants to know why you're trying to kill them. Ashford opened his mouth, closed it. For the first time in probably his entire life, his father's money and his Harvard degree weren't shields that could protect him. Walsh stepped forward, trying to salvage this situation before it became completely unrecoverable. Colonel, please, there's been a misunderstanding. Dr. Ashford is a skilled physician with excellent credentials from... I don't care if his credentials are signed by God himself. Did he order 150 milligrams or 75 silence? The kind of silence that feels like a held breath, like the moment before a bomb detonates, like the space between lightning and thunder where you're waiting for the world to break apart. I'll make this simple, Holloway said. His voice dropped even lower, more dangerous because it was quieter. I want an independent physician review of this case. Someone with no connection to this hospital, no financial ties to the Ashford family, no reason to protect anyone. Someone who can look at the medical facts without bias and tell me the truth. And I want it done right now, this morning, before I make my next phone call. Walsh's professional mask finally cracked completely. Colonel, you can't just demand the board would need to approve, we'd need to schedule. You have 2 hours. After that, Senator O'Brien is expecting my call, either to tell him the situation is being addressed appropriately or to recommend immediate suspension of all federal contracts pending investigation. He checked his watch. It's now 8:32 a.m. You have until 10:32. Walsh looked at Ashford, at the staff watching, at the legal nightmare materializing in front of her like a ghost made of paperwork and federal investigations. I'll make the call. She disappeared back into her office. More frantic phone calls. More desperate explanations to people who didn't want to hear about problems, only solutions. 23 minutes later, Dr. Thomas Morrison walked through the ER doors. 62 years old, 30 years of emergency medicine experience at Cook County Hospital. Recently retired. No financial ties to anyone. No reason to lie for anyone. Just a physician who'd spent his career treating patients who couldn't afford lawyers and had learned that the truth was usually simpler and sadder than anyone wanted to admit. Walsh had called him because she hoped he'd back up Ashford. Credentials and medical judgment against a nurse's complaint, the way these things usually went. She'd made a critical error. Dr. Morrison reviewed both versions of the chart, reviewed Kat's screenshots, reviewed the patient's weight and vital signs, did the calculations himself on a piece of paper showing his work like a student taking an exam. When he looked up 15 minutes later, his expression was grim. For a patient weighing 165 pounds, the maximum safe dosage of midazolam for sedation is 75 milligrams. 150 milligrams would be expected to cause respiratory depression in approximately 90% of patients. Given this patient's injuries and compromised respiratory status, the probability of arrest approaches 100%. He paused, looked directly at Ashford. Based on the original medical record, that's exactly what happened. The patient suffered respiratory arrest, required emergency intervention including needle decompression and manual ventilation to survive. Intervention that was performed by Nurse Brennan after you ordered a medication dosage that nearly killed him. Now wait just a, Ashford started. I'm not finished. Dr. Morrison's voice could have etched glass. I've been practicing emergency medicine for 3 decades. I've made mistakes. Every doctor has. We're human. We get tired, we miss things, we make wrong calls. But I have never falsified a medical record to cover up a mistake. That's not medicine. That's criminal fraud. And if federal healthcare dollars touch this patient's care, which they absolutely did given he's active duty military, then it's also a federal crime. He turned to Walsh. These records have been tampered with. The digital audit trail proves it. That needs to be reported to the State Medical Board, the Joint Commission, and the Department of Defense Inspector General. Not eventually, not after you consult with lawyers. Immediately. Today. This morning. Walsh looked like she might vomit. Dr. Morrison, I'm sure we can resolve this internally. If we could just... There's nothing to resolve internally. A physician ordered a medication that nearly killed a patient. When a nurse prevented that death, she was fired. Then medical records were altered to hide what happened. That's not a personnel issue. That's a criminal conspiracy. Ashford's face had gone from red to purple, his hands clenched into fists. Do you have any idea who my father is? The money my family has invested in this hospital, the donations we've made, the board members we know. If you proceed with this witch hunt, I'll make sure you never work in medicine again. I'll sue you for defamation. You'll what? Colonel Holloway's voice cut through Ashford's threats like a knife through silk. Threaten a retired physician who has nothing to lose. Use your father's money to intimidate witnesses. Prove everything Nurse Brennan said about you is absolutely true. He moved closer, not threatening, just inevitable. The way a storm moves closer. The way consequences arrive no matter how much money you have. Let me tell you something about money, doctor. I've spent 30 years in special forces. I've operated in 47 countries. I've lost friends, good men, better men than you'll ever be. Men who died for ideals your father's money can't buy. Honor, integrity, sacrifice. The belief that some things matter more than personal survival. Holloway stopped directly in front of Ashford, close enough that the younger man had to look up slightly. Your father can buy buildings. He can buy influence. He can buy board seats and politicians, and probably even judges. But he can't buy back the life of the soldier you nearly killed. He can't buy back the 22 years of service from the nurse you destroyed. And he absolutely cannot buy my silence or the silence of the people I've already called. He let that sink in, watched Ashford's entitled arrogance collapse like a building with its foundation removed. I've made 3 phone calls this morning. Senator O'Brien, who sits on armed services and has the power to pull every federal dollar this hospital receives. The DOD Inspector General, who's already opening an investigation. And the Veterans Affairs Secretary, who's very interested in why VA-eligible patients are being treated at a facility that retaliates against safety advocates. Holloway's voice dropped even lower. Your father's money just became your father's biggest problem. Because every donation he's made, every board position he holds, every bit of influence he's purchased, all of that is now evidence of corruption, of using wealth to silence critics, of prioritizing profit over patients. He stepped back. You have until 10:30. Decide how you want this to end. Ashford tried to hold his ground, tried to maintain his arrogance, failed completely. He looked at Walsh silently, begging her to fix this, to make it go away, to use her administrative power to protect him the way she always had. Walsh wouldn't meet his eyes. He left, walking quickly, almost running. The first time in his privileged life that consequences had actually touched him. Holloway turned to Walsh. You have 90 minutes. Reinstate Catherine Brennan, full back pay, written apology, and initiate an independent investigation into patient safety protocols at this hospital, including a review of any other nurses terminated for conflicts with Dr. Ashford, because I'm guessing he's not new to this. Walsh's voice came out as a whisper. The board will never approve. Then you'd better be very persuasive, because after 10:30, my next call is to the Chicago Tribune, and I'm going to tell them everything. The overdose, the crash, the fired nurse, the falsified records, the cover-up. By tomorrow morning, every veteran in Illinois will know what this hospital did. He paused. Let her imagine that news cycle. Let her picture the protesters, the boycotts, the federal investigations, the career-ending disaster. How's your federal funding looking now, Ms. Walsh? She retreated to her office like a soldier retreating from superior firepower. Through the glass walls, they watched her make call after call, emergency board meeting, legal consultation, crisis management, the machinery of institutional self-preservation grinding into motion. Kat stood there feeling like she was watching a building collapse in slow motion. 22 years of swallowing injustice. 22 years of following orders from doctors who valued ego over evidence. 22 years of watching the system crush anyone who challenged it. And now, in less than an hour, a Special Forces colonel had dismantled the entire corrupt apparatus. She wasn't sure whether to feel vindicated or terrified. Holloway turned to her, his expression softened again, the warrior becoming human again. You should sit down. You've been on your feet since 5:30. I'm fine, sir. Catherine, sit. It wasn't a request. She sat. He pulled up a chair next to her. Around them, the ER was slowly returning to normal function. Trauma bays clearing, new patients arriving, life and death continuing their eternal dance regardless of human drama. I need to tell you something, Holloway said quietly. About 7 years ago, about why I came back today. Kat waited, listening the way nurses learn to listen with full attention without judgment, creating space for truth. That infection nearly killed me. The doctors told my wife to prepare. Told my son to come say goodbye. Said I had maybe 48 hours. His hands curled into fists on his knees. I remember lying there with fever making everything blur, thinking about all the missions I'd never complete, all the soldiers I'd never train, my son's wedding I'd never attend, grandchildren I'd never meet. He looked at his scarred hands, maps of 3 decades of service. You worked the night shift, came in around 7 p.m. each evening. First few nights you were professional, checked vitals, adjusted medications, standard nursing care. But then the third night the pain got unbearable. I was thrashing around, pulling at IV lines, not really conscious, but not unconscious either. Trapped in that terrible place between. Kat remembered holding his hands so he wouldn't tear out the lines. Remembered the desperate strength of a dying man fighting against restraints he couldn't even see. You sat with me, held my hands, talked to me. Not about medical things, about life, about your daughter, about your husband who'd been killed in Fallujah, about how you'd learn to live with grief without letting it consume you. He met her eyes. You probably don't even remember what you said, but I do, every word. What did I say? You said, Colonel, the human body is incredibly resilient. It can survive almost anything. But the mind gives up first. You have to decide right now what you're fighting for. Because if you don't know what you're living for, you won't have the strength to survive. So decide, right now, what are you living for? Kat felt her throat tighten. She'd said those words to dozens of patients over the years. Never knew if they made any difference. Never knew if anyone actually heard them through the pain and fear and medication. I decided that night, Holloway continued, decided I was fighting to see my son become the man I knew he could be. Decided I was fighting to meet the grandchildren I might have someday. Decided I was fighting because giving up would dishonor every soldier I'd ever lost who didn't get the choice to survive. He paused, swallowed hard. I survived, made full recovery, went back to active duty for 4 more years, got to watch my son make captain, got to train a whole new generation of Rangers, got to retire with dignity instead of dying in a hospital bed at 45. I got all of that because you sat with me in the dark and reminded me what I was living for. Kat's eyes burned. She blinked hard. Nurses didn't cry at work. even nurses who'd been fired and rehired in the span of 18 hours. You were doing your job, sir. I didn't do anything special. No, his voice hardened again. You did something extraordinary. In a system that teaches people not to care, that rewards efficiency over compassion, that measures success in billing codes instead of lives saved, you cared. You gave a damn. You treated me like a human being instead of a patient number. And yesterday, that same system punished you for it. He leaned forward, intent, focused. I'm not leaving until this is fixed. Not just for you. For every nurse in every hospital who's been told to shut up and follow orders, even when those orders are wrong. This ends today. Here, now. Before Kat could respond, Walsh's office door opened. She walked out looking 10 years older than she had an hour ago. Professional mask completely shattered. Just exhaustion and fear, and the realization that her career was probably over regardless of what happened next. The board has agreed to an emergency meeting at 11 a.m. They want to hear from all parties involved before making any decisions. Not good enough, Holloway said flatly. Reinstatement first, meeting second. Colonel, I don't have the authority to reinstate without board approval. Then get someone who does. You have 47 minutes. Walsh disappeared again. Rebecca appeared with coffee for Kat. Jessica Palmer hovered nearby, looking guilty and terrified and young. So terribly young. Ms. Brennan, I'm so sorry. Jessica's voice broke. I should have refused. I should have stood with you. I should have. Kat took the young nurse's hand, squeezed gently. Jessica, you were put in an impossible position. You're 23 years old, 6 months out of school with $80,000 in student loans, and a system that taught you never to question doctors. You made a choice. It wasn't the choice I would have wanted, but I understand why you made it. But you got fired because... I got fired because this hospital values money over patient safety. That's not on you, that's on them. The system failed both of us. Kat pulled the younger nurse closer. But here's what I need you to do now. Whatever happens in that board meeting, tell the truth. Tell them exactly what happened, what Ashford ordered, what I said, what you did, the truth. That's all any of us can do. Be honest and let the consequences fall where they will. Jessica nodded, tears streaming down her face. I will, I promise. At 10:23, Walsh emerged one final time. This time she carried paperwork. The board chairman has authorized your immediate reinstatement pending the outcome of the full board meeting. Full back pay for the time you were terminated. The termination will be expunged from your record entirely. Kat took the papers, read them carefully. Everything was there. Reinstatement, back pay, expungement, even a note that she'd be compensated for legal consultation time. But something was missing. I want more than my job back. Walsh blinked, stunned. I'm sorry, Kat stood, looked at the woman who'd fired her less than 24 hours ago, felt something shift inside her chest, something that had been locked down for 22 years. The part of her that had learned to accept injustice because fighting it seemed impossible. That part was done accepting. I want a full independent investigation into patient safety protocols at this hospital. I want every nurse who was terminated in the past year reviewed to determine if they were retaliated against for safety concerns. I want mandatory communication training for all staff physicians and nurses both. I want a patient safety oversight committee with equal nurse representation. And I want Dr. Ashford placed on supervised practice for a minimum of 12 months with quarterly reviews. Walsh stared. That's not reasonable. The cost alone, the political implications, the board would never... The cost is less than a single wrongful death lawsuit, less than the federal funding you're about to lose, less than your hospital's reputation being destroyed when this story hits every news outlet in Chicago. Kat crossed her arms. I'm not interested in getting my job back and pretending none of this happened. I'm interested in making sure it never happens to another nurse. Ever. At this hospital or anywhere else. Holloway smiled, actually smiled. Pride and satisfaction mixing with something that looked like paternal affection. You heard the lady. Those are her terms. Non-negotiable. Walsh looked between them. Looked at the clock showing 10:28. Looked at her entire career circling the drain. I'll present it to the board. No, Kat said. Her voice was steady, certain. Those are my conditions for reinstatement. The board can accept them, or I walk away, and you explain to federal investigators why you refuse to implement basic safety protocols after a near-fatal medication error. For the first time in 22 years of nursing, Catherine Brennan wasn't asking permission. She was setting terms. And it felt like the first real breath she'd taken in decades. 2 weeks passed before Catherine Brennan truly understood the scope of what they'd started. The first week had been a blur of depositions, interviews, and paperwork. State medical board investigators filled conference rooms with boxes of files. The Joint Commission sent a team that spent 3 days combing through every policy, every procedure, every complaint that had been filed and ignored over the past 5 years. The Department of Defense Inspector General's office set up a temporary headquarters in an empty wing of the hospital, interviewing staff members one by one. Kat worked her shifts, came home exhausted, answered questions from investigators until her voice went hoarse, and slowly, painfully watched the system she'd worked in for 22 years reveal itself for what it truly was. It wasn't just St. Michael's Hospital. It wasn't just Dr. Brandon Ashford. It was bigger than that, deeper than that. Captain Patrick Holloway had been investigating military healthcare facilities for 4 months when Kat's case broke everything open. What he'd found was a pattern that stretched across 12 hospitals in 7 states. All of them received significant federal funding. All of them had board members with deep financial ties to pharmaceutical companies or medical device manufacturers. And all of them had one thing in common: nurses who raised safety concerns were systematically silenced. The second week, Patrick came to Kat's apartment with a file 3 inches thick. She let him in, made coffee, sat across from him at the small kitchen table where she'd sat with Declan 1,000 times before he deployed, where she'd helped Molly with homework, where she'd cried alone after reading the termination letter that had started all of this. Patrick looked like his father, same steady eyes, same quiet authority, but there was something gentler in him. Maybe because he'd chosen medicine as his path in the military, chosen healing over pure combat. "I need to show you something," he said. "It's not easy to look at." He opened the file. Inside were medical records, incident reports, testimonies from nurses whose names had been redacted. Case after case after case. Nurses fired for questioning medication orders. Nurses transferred to undesirable shifts for reporting safety violations. Nurses who'd quit rather than continue working in environments where speaking up meant career suicide. Impatience. God, the patience. A 62-year-old veteran who died from a medication interaction that a nurse had flagged 3 days before his death. The nurse's concern had been dismissed. She'd been written up for creating a hostile work environment. A 34-year-old mother of 3 who'd been left paralyzed after a surgical error. The surgical nurse had questioned the procedure, had been told to stay in her lane, had watched helplessly as the surgeon made the cut that severed the spinal cord. A 19-year-old soldier who'd lost both legs to infection because post-operative protocols had been ignored. The nurse who'd advocated for earlier intervention had been fired 2 weeks after the amputation for insubordination. Kat read through case after case until the pages blurred together. Her coffee went cold. Her hands started shaking. "How many?" she finally asked. "That we can prove 47 incidents across 12 hospitals, 17 deaths, 30 serious injuries, unknown number of near misses that were caught before disaster struck." Patrick leaned forward. "But Kat, those are just the ones we found. The ones where someone kept records, where someone was brave enough or angry enough to document what happened. How many more cases were there where nurses just stayed quiet, where they followed orders they knew were wrong because they couldn't afford to lose their jobs?" Kat thought about all the times she'd swallowed her concerns, all the times she'd suggested an alternative approach to a doctor's order and been shot down, all the times she'd documented her reservations in the chart and then watched those notes mysteriously disappear during chart reviews. How many patients had she failed by staying quiet? "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we build a case. Federal prosecutors are looking at charges: falsification of medical records, conspiracy to defraud the government, possibly even negligent homicide in some of the deaths. But criminal charges take time. Years, probably." He pulled out another document. Cleaner, more official looking. "This is what I want to talk to you about. My father and we've been working with Senator O'Brien and a few other members of the Armed Services Committee. They want to introduce legislation. The Healthcare Worker Protection Act. It would make it a federal crime to retaliate against nurses or other healthcare workers who report safety concerns in facilities that receive federal funding." Kat read through the summary: whistleblower protections, mandatory reporting systems, independent oversight, penalties for hospitals that fail to investigate safety complaints. "It's comprehensive," she said, "almost too comprehensive. Getting something like this through Congress would normally take years and might never happen at all," Patrick finished. But we have something most legislation doesn't have. We have a face, we have a story that people can understand. We have you. Kat looked up sharply. Me. You're exactly what this needs, Kat. You're not some activist with an agenda. You're a nurse with 22 years of experience. A military widow. A mother putting her daughter through West Point. You saved a soldier's life and got fired for it. Then you stood up to a system that tried to destroy you. That's a story people will listen to. I'm not a spokesperson. I'm just a nurse who gave a damn when it would have been easier not to. That's exactly what we need. Kat set the document down, looked at the photos on her wall. Declan in his dress blues. Molly at West Point. The folded flag. What would I have to do? Testify before Congress. Tell your story. Show them what happens when profit matters more than patience. Help us make sure what happened to you doesn't happen to anyone else. She thought about Jessica Palmer barely out of nursing school, hands shaking as she administered a medication she knew was wrong. Thought about Rebecca Wallace, 18 years of experience, too afraid to speak up because she was the sole provider for her disabled mother. Thought about all the other nurses in all the other hospitals who were making those same impossible choices every single day. I'll do it, Patrick smiled. It transformed his serious face into something warmer. Thank you. But Kat, you need to know this is going to get harder before it gets better. The hospital industry is going to fight this. The pharmaceutical companies are going to fight this. They have money and lawyers and lobbyists. They're going to try to discredit you. Dig into your past. Make this about anything except the real issue. Let them try. Kat's voice was steady. I've got nothing to hide. I did my job. I saved lives. If they want to attack me for that, fine. But I'm not backing down. The same day Patrick left, Kat received a call from Dr. Claire Hamilton, the new board chair at St. Michael's. Catherine, I know you're on your day off, but could you come in? There's something I'd like to discuss. Kat drove to the hospital with a knot of anxiety in her stomach. Even though she'd been reinstated, even though the investigation was ongoing, walking back into St. Michael's still felt like walking into enemy territory. Dr. Hamilton met her in a conference room on the administrative floor. The older woman looked tired but determined. Thank you for coming. I'll get right to the point. The board has accepted my recommendation to create the position of Director of Nursing Excellence and Patient Advocacy. It's a new role. Essentially, you'd oversee the implementation of all the safety protocols we agreed to. Train staff on communication. Build the oversight committee. Investigate complaints. Make sure what happened to you never happens again. Kat stared. You want me to leave bedside nursing? I want you to do what you've been doing for 22 years, advocate for patients, but from a position where you can actually create systemic change, where you can build something that lasts beyond any one shift or any one patient. I'm a nurse, Dr. Hamilton. That's what I do. I take care of patients. And you'd still be doing that, just on a larger scale. Instead of saving one patient at a time, you'd be building systems that protect thousands of patients. Isn't that worth considering? Kat looked out the window at the Chicago skyline. Thought about going back to 12-hour shifts, overnight rotations, the physical toll of bedside nursing. She was 44. Her back ached. Her feet hurt. How many more years could she realistically do this? But more than that, she thought about what Patrick had shown her. 47 cases, 17 deaths. How many of those could have been prevented if someone had been in a position to change the system instead of just surviving within it? What's the salary? She asked. Dr. Hamilton named a figure that was 40% more than what Kat was making as a staff nurse. Enough to cover Molly's remaining expenses at West Point with room to breathe. Enough to maybe save something for the future. Enough to not live paycheck to paycheck for the first time in 18 years. I need to think about it. Take your time, but Catherine, we need someone who won't be intimidated. Someone who will fight for what's right even when it's politically inconvenient. Someone the staff will trust. That's you. Kat called Molly that night. Her daughter's face appeared on the video screen, hair pulled back in the tight bun. West Point required wearing her gray cadet uniform. 19 years old and already so much like her father, it made Kat's heart ache. Mom, I heard about the investigation. It's all over the military news channels. It's bigger than I thought it would be, Kat admitted. You're a badass mom. Dad would be so proud. Kat smiled. I keep wondering what he'd say about all this. Molly didn't hesitate. He'd say you did the right thing. He'd say you never backed down. He'd say you're exactly the person he knew you were when he married you. I miss him, baby girl, especially now. I could use his advice. What would you ask him? Kat thought about it. They offered me a new job, director position, more money, more influence. But it means leaving bedside nursing, leaving what I've done for 22 years. Molly was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Mom, do you remember what you told me when I was deciding whether to apply to West Point? Remind me. You said some people serve by doing the work. Other people serve by building systems that make the work better. Both are necessary. Both are honorable. You just have to decide which kind of service you're called to right now. Kat felt tears prick her eyes. She'd forgotten that conversation. But Molly was right. She'd said exactly that. I think right now, Molly continued, you're being called to build something. Not because bedside nursing isn't important, but because you have a chance to change things for every nurse who comes after you. That's a different kind of service, but it's still service. After they hung up, Kat sat in the dark apartment and thought about service, about what it meant to spend yourself for something larger than your own survival. Declan had died serving, given everything for a mission he believed in. Maybe it was time for Kat to serve in a different way. She called Dr. Hamilton the next morning. I'll take the position, but I have conditions. Of course you do. Kat could hear the smile in Hamilton's voice. I want full authority to investigate any safety complaint, regardless of who it involves. I want direct reporting to the board, not filtered through administration. I want a budget for training and a staff of at least 3 people. And I want the title to be Director of the Brennan Patient Safety Center. Silence on the other end. Then the Brennan Center. After your husband, after my husband, so everyone who works there remembers what we're fighting for. So it's clear this isn't about ego or politics. It's about honor, about doing what's right even when it costs everything. Deal. When can you start? 3 months later, they held the dedication ceremony. The Brennan Patient Safety Center occupied a renovated wing on the hospital's 4th floor. 3 offices, a training room, a conference space, and on the wall a plaque with Declan's photo and the words, in honor of Gunnery Sergeant Declan Brennan, USMC, whose sacrifice reminds us why we fight. Below that, another plaque dedicated to all healthcare workers who speak truth to power even when silence would be safer. The ceremony drew more attention than Kat had expected. Local news crews, representatives from nursing organizations, veterans groups, and standing in the front row, Colonel Garrett Holloway, Captain Patrick Holloway, and Dr. Thomas Morrison. But the guest who surprised Kat most was sitting in the back, looking uncomfortable in civilian clothes. Sergeant Liam Torres, the soldier whose life had started all of this. He approached her after the formal presentations, walking with just a slight limp, his wife beside him. She was heavily pregnant 8 months by Kat's professional assessment. Ms. Brennan, I don't know if you remember me. Sergeant Torres, of course I remember you. He looked younger in civilian clothes, less like a soldier, more like the 24-year-old kid he actually was. I wanted to thank you, not just for saving my life that night, but for what you did after, for standing up, for fighting. His wife squeezed his hand. We're naming our son Declan, after your husband, if that's okay with you. Kat's throat closed. She couldn't speak for a moment. Torres continued. I asked around about him, about what happened in Fallujah. They said he was one of the good ones, said he never left anyone behind, never compromised, never backed down. He met her eyes. Sounds like he married the right woman. Thank you, Kat managed. That means more than you know. After Torres and his wife left, Colonel Holloway found her standing alone near the window looking out at Chicago. You okay? I keep thinking about all the people who made this possible. You, Patrick, Dr. Morrison, Rebecca, and the other nurses. Even Jessica Palmer, who was brave enough to tell the truth even though it implicated her own actions. You're the one who made it possible, Kat. Everyone else just helped amplify what you started. I didn't start anything, I just did my job. No, Holloway's voice was firm. You did more than your duty. You drew a line. You said, not here, not on my watch, not to my patient. That took courage. Kat turned to face him. Can I ask you something? That night 7 years ago, when I told you to decide what you were fighting for, did you ever regret surviving? Holloway considered the question seriously. Sometimes, on the hard days, when the nightmares get bad, when I think about all the men I lost who deserved to survive more than I did. He paused. But then I think about my son, about the soldiers I got to train after I recovered, about being here today to see this. He gestured at the center. No, I don't regret surviving because surviving gave me purpose. Gave me the chance to make the years I have left count for something. That's all any of us can do, isn't it? Make it count. That's all we can do, Holloway agreed. And Kat, you're making it count. 6 weeks after the Brennan Center opened, Kat testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee. The hearing room was intimidating, high ceilings, wood paneling, rows of senators elevated above the witness table, cameras everywhere, gallery packed with journalists, lobbyists, and observers. Kat wore her best professional clothes, navy blue suit, white blouse, minimal jewelry. Molly had helped her pick the outfit during her last visit home. You want to look competent but approachable mom, like someone's trusted nurse, not like you're trying to be something you're not. Senator Patrick O'Brien led the questioning. 62 years old, former Army Ranger, now the ranking member of the committee. He'd served with Colonel Holloway in the First Gulf War. Understood military culture. Understood sacrifice. Ms. Brennan, thank you for being here today. I'd like you to tell the committee in your own words what happened on the night of October 14th. Kat took a breath, told the story, the medication order, the patient crashing, the save, the termination, the falsified records. She didn't embellish, didn't add drama, just stated facts in the same calm voice she'd used for 22 years when giving a report to oncoming shifts. When she finished, Senator O'Brien leaned forward. Ms. Brennan, how many years have you been a nurse? 22 years, sir. And in those 22 years, approximately how many patients would you estimate you've cared for? Kat did the mental math. 10,000 shifts. Average of 12 to 15 patients per shift. Conservatively, over 100,000 patients, sir. A murmur ran through the gallery. Even some of the senators looked surprised. 100,000 patients. That's extraordinary. And in all those years, all those patients, how many times would you say you've had to question a physician's order because you believed it posed a risk to patient safety? Kat had known this question was coming, had prepared for it, but the truth was still hard to say. Hundreds of times, sir, maybe thousands. And how many times were you thanked for raising those concerns? Rarely, sir. How many times were you disciplined for raising those concerns before the incident that led to your termination? I received 3 written warnings over the years, all for what was termed failure to maintain professional hierarchy or undermining physician authority. In each case, I had questioned an order that I believed was unsafe. In 2 of those cases, subsequent reviews showed my concerns were valid. Senator O'Brien sat back. Let that sink in. So let me make sure I understand. Over the course of your career, you've advocated for patient safety hundreds or thousands of times. You've been proven right on multiple occasions. And instead of being commended for your vigilance, you've been disciplined. Is that correct? Yes, sir. And this culture of silencing nurses who speak up, is it unique to St. Michael's Hospital? No, sir. Based on my conversations with nursing colleagues across the country, it's systemic. It's everywhere. Another senator jumped in. Senator Linda Morrison, no relation to Dr. Morrison, but a former nurse herself before entering politics. Ms. Brennan, I want to ask you something that I think is on everyone's mind. You're a widow. Your husband was killed serving this country. You're raising a daughter alone. You have student loans, a mortgage, bills to pay. When you were fired, you lost your health insurance, your income, everything. So my question is, why didn't you just stay quiet? Why didn't you follow the order, keep your job, and move on? Kat looked at Senator Morrison, saw genuine curiosity there, not judgment. Because Senator, my husband didn't die so I could learn to stay quiet. He died believing that some things are worth more than safety or comfort or financial security. He died believing that honor matters, that integrity matters, that doing what's right even when it costs you everything is what separates us from chaos. Her voice strengthened. I'm a nurse. My job is to keep people alive, to advocate for them when they can't advocate for themselves, to be the last line of defense between a vulnerable patient and a system that sometimes values efficiency or cost savings or ego over human life. If I can't do that, if I can't speak up when I see something wrong, then what's the point? Why even be a nurse? The room was absolutely silent. My daughter is at West Point right now, Kat continued, learning to be an Army officer, learning to lead soldiers. And someday she might have to make impossible choices, choices where doing the right thing could cost her career, could cost her life. What kind of mother would I be if I taught her through my actions that staying quiet is safer, that keeping your head down is smarter, that survival matters more than integrity? She looked directly at the cameras. I got fired for saving a soldier's life. If that's the price of integrity, I'll pay it. Because the alternative, staying quiet while patients die, that's a price I can't live with. The hearing room erupted in applause. Senator O'Brien didn't even try to quiet it, just let it run its course. The next day, Kat's testimony was everywhere. News channels played clips on loop. Social media exploded. Nursing organizations shared it with their members. Veterans groups rallied behind it. Within a week, 3 more nurses came forward with similar stories. Then 7, then 20. The Senate fast-tracked the Healthcare Worker Protection Act. Usually legislation took years. This took 4 months. It passed with bipartisan support. 83 to 17 in the Senate, 342 to 93 in the House. The president signed it in a Rose Garden ceremony. Kat was invited to attend, stood next to Senator O'Brien as the president put pen to paper and made retaliation against healthcare whistleblowers a federal crime. But the real victory came 6 months later. The Brennan Patient Safety Center had received over 200 complaints in its first 6 months. Kat and her small staff, she'd hired Rebecca Wallace as deputy director, and 2 other experienced nurses investigated each one. Some were legitimate safety concerns that led to policy changes. Some were interpersonal conflicts that needed mediation rather than investigation. But every single one was taken seriously, documented, addressed, and the culture at St. Michael's was changing. Doctors started asking nurses for input instead of issuing orders. Interdisciplinary safety rounds became standard practice. Incident reports were treated as learning opportunities instead of blame sessions. Medical errors decreased by 37% in the first year. Other hospitals noticed, started calling, wanted to know how to replicate what St. Michael's was doing. Kat found herself traveling, speaking at conferences, training other hospitals on building safety cultures. It wasn't what she'd expected her career to become, but it was making a difference. 1 year to the day after the dedication ceremony, Kat received a call from Captain Patrick Holloway. "Kat, I need to tell you something. Something you should hear before it hits the news." Her stomach tightened. What happened? Dr. Brandon Ashford, he was just arrested. Federal charges, conspiracy to defraud the government, falsification of medical records. Negligent homicide in the death of that veteran I told you about, the one who died from the medication interaction. Kat sat down. They got him. They got all of them. Ashford, 3 hospital administrators who helped cover things up, and 2 board members who had financial ties to pharmaceutical companies and were using their positions to push unnecessary medications. The DOJ press release goes out in an hour. What about Richard Ashford? Still under investigation, but we have evidence he knew about the falsified records, participated in the cover-ups, used his money to silence complaints. He's probably going to be indicted too. After Patrick hung up, Kat sat alone in her office, looked at Declan's photo on the wall. "We got them, baby," she whispered. "Not all of them, not everywhere, but we got these ones. It's a start." That evening, she drove to the cemetery where Declan was buried. She hadn't been there in months, too busy, too focused on the work. His headstone was simple. Gunnery Sergeant Declan Michael Brennan, USMC, Purple Heart, killed in action, Fallujah, Iraq. March 15, 2007. Beloved husband and father. Kat sat on the grass next to the stone. The late afternoon sun was warm on her face. "I testified before Congress," she told him. "Can you believe that me, standing in front of senators and cameras, talking about integrity and honor, like I have any idea what I'm doing?" The cemetery was quiet except for birdsong. "I used your words, you know, about how some things are worth more than safety, about how doing what's right matters even when it costs everything." The senators loved it, but December 1st was terrified. Still am sometimes. What if I'm doing this wrong? What if I can't actually change anything? What if I'm just one person shouting into the void? She traced her fingers over his name carved in the stone. "But then I think about that promise I made you, to keep fighting, to never back down. And I think about Molly, who's so much like you, it scares me. She's graduating West Point next year, top of her class, going into military medicine. She wants to be a flight surgeon." Kat smiled through tears. "She's everything we hoped she'd be, December strong, principled, brave. She's going to change the world, just like you would have if you'd gotten the chance." The sun was setting. Kat stood, brushed grass from her pants. "I have to go. Congressional hearing tomorrow on expanding the Protection Act to include all healthcare workers, not just those in federally funded facilities." But I wanted to tell you we're winning. Slowly, incrementally, one hospital at a time, one nurse at a time. We're winning. She kissed her fingers, touched them to his name. I love you, I miss you, and I'm going to keep my promise. I'm going to keep fighting, for as long as it takes. The dedication ceremony for the expanded Brennan Patient Safety Center happened 18 months after the original opening. They'd taken over an entire floor now. 10 staff members, dedicated training facilities, a hotline for nurses anywhere in the country to report safety concerns anonymously. The ceremony drew national attention this time. Secretary of Health and Human Services attended, multiple senators, nursing organization presidents, hospital administrators from across the country who were implementing similar programs. And in the front row, Sergeant Liam Torres, his wife, and their 1-year-old son, Declan. Sergeant Marcus Fletcher, fully recovered from his injuries, now working as a combat medic trainer. Jessica Palmer, who'd overcome her fear and was now working as the center's patient safety educator. Colonel Garrett Holloway gave the keynote address. 7 years ago, a nurse named Catherine Brennan sat with me while I was dying. She saved my life. Not just medically, though she did that too, but she saved my life by reminding me what I was living for, by showing me that integrity still mattered in a world that often seems to value everything except integrity. He looked at Kat. Last year, that same nurse saved a young soldier named Liam Torres, and when she was punished for doing so, she didn't back down. She didn't accept the injustice. She fought. And in fighting, she started something that's now saving lives across this entire country. He paused. The military has a saying, no one left behind. It means we don't abandon our brothers and sisters even when it's dangerous, even when it costs us. Nurse Brennan lived that principle every day for 22 years. Every patient, every shift, no one left behind. Today we're dedicating this center in her honor. But more than that, we're dedicating it to every nurse, every healthcare worker who's ever had to choose between doing what's right and keeping their job. We're saying loud and clear that you don't have to make that choice anymore. Not here. Not in facilities that adopt these protocols. You can speak up without fear. You can advocate without retaliation. You can do your job the way it's supposed to be done. He looked out at the audience. This is how we honor the fallen. Not just with ceremonies and monuments, but by building systems that embody the values they died for. Declan Brennan died believing that honor and integrity matter more than comfort or safety. Today, his wife is building a legacy that proves he was right. When it was Kat's turn to speak, she stood at the podium and looked out at the faces staring back at her. Nurses, doctors, administrators, military personnel, patients who'd been saved by the changes they'd implemented. And in the back, wearing her gray West Point cadet uniform, Molly, home on leave for the ceremony. Looking so proud that Kat almost lost her composure. I'm not good at speeches, Kat began. I'm a nurse. I'm better with hands than words. But I need to say something important. She took a breath. This center isn't about me. It's not even really about my husband, though. I hope it honors his memory. This center is about a simple truth: patients deserve advocates. Healthcare workers deserve protection when they speak up. And systems that punish integrity instead of rewarding it need to change. When I was fired 18 months ago, I thought my career was over. I thought I'd lost everything. And in a way I had. I lost my job, my income, my sense of security. But I gained something too. I gained clarity. I gained purpose. I gained the understanding that some things really are worth losing everything for. She looked at the nurses in the audience. Every one of you has been in that position, where you saw something wrong, where you knew the right thing to do, where you had to choose between speaking up and staying safe. One of the time you probably stayed quiet, not because you're cowards, but because you have families to feed, bills to pay, lives that depend on you keeping your job. I understand that. I lived that for 22 years. But I'm here to tell you, you don't have to live it anymore. Not if we build these systems together. Not if we create cultures where safety matters more than hierarchy, where truth matters more than ego, where patients come first always. Her voice strengthened. The legislation that passed, the policies we've implemented, the training programs we've developed, none of that came from me alone. It came from hundreds of nurses who were brave enough to tell their stories, from doctors who were humble enough to admit that they don't have all the answers, from administrators who cared more about doing right than looking good, from investigators and legislators and advocates who saw an injustice and decided to fix it. This is how change happens, not through grand gestures, Not through heroes, but through ordinary people making difficult choices. Through nurses who speak up one shift at a time. Through doctors who listen one patient at a time. Through systems that improve one policy at a time. She looked at Molly. My daughter is learning to be an officer. Learning to lead soldiers. Learning that leadership isn't about authority, it's about service. About sacrifice. About being willing to pay the price for doing what's right. I want her to inherit a world where that kind of leadership is valued, where integrity isn't punished, where speaking truth to power doesn't cost you everything. We're not there yet. We've taken important steps. But there are still hospitals where nurses are afraid to speak up. Still patients dying from preventable errors. Still systems that protect the powerful instead of the vulnerable. So this work, it's not finished. It's just beginning. And I'm asking all of you to join us, to build these systems in your hospitals, to protect the nurses who speak up, to create the cultures where patient safety isn't optional, it's fundamental. She paused, looked at the plaque with Declan's photo. My husband died serving his country. I serve by honoring his sacrifice, by building something that lasts, by making sure his daughter inherits a world worth the price he paid. That's what this center is about. That's what all of this is about. Legacy, not in monuments or ceremonies, but in lives saved, in systems changed, in cultures transformed. Thank you for being part of that legacy. The applause was thunderous, but Kat barely heard it. She was looking at Molly, at Colonel Holloway, at all the nurses and patients and advocates who'd made this possible. And she was thinking about Declan, about the promise she'd made him, about keeping that promise every single day for the rest of her life. After the ceremony, there was a reception. Kat was shaking hands accepting congratulations when she saw Sergeant Torres approaching with his wife and son. Little Declan was walking now, unsteady toddler steps holding his mother's hand. Miss Brennan, we wanted you to meet him properly. Torres knelt down next to his son. Declan, this is the lady I told you about, the one who saved Daddy's life. The toddler looked up at Kat with huge brown eyes. Then unprompted, he let go of his mother's hand and toddled over to her, wrapped his small arms around her leg. Kat's eyes filled. She picked him up, held him close. Thank you, Torres' wife said quietly. Not just for saving Liam, but for fighting for all of us, for making sure other families don't have to go through what we almost went through. After they left, Rebecca found Kat standing alone near the window. You okay, boss? Kat wiped her eyes. Yeah, just overwhelmed. It's a lot. You did good, Kat. You did really good. We did good. All of us. Rebecca smiled. True, but you started it. You drew the line. The rest of us just followed your lead. That night, Kat drove home to her small apartment. Molly was staying with her, sleeping on the couch like she used to when she was a kid. They made dinner together, pasta with marinara sauce, salad, garlic bread, nothing fancy, just comfortable and familiar. Mom, Molly said while they were eating, can I ask you something, anything? Do you ever regret it standing up to Dr. Ashford, fighting the system, all the stress and publicity, and everything that came after? Kat thought about it, really thought about it. Sometimes, she said honestly, when I'm testifying for the 100th time, when I'm reading hate mail from people who think nurses should just shut up and follow orders, when I'm exhausted and overwhelmed and wondering if any of this is actually making a difference. But then I think about Liam Torres, about the nurses who call the hotline because they finally have somewhere safe to report concerns, about the hospitals that have adopted our protocols and seen their error rates drop, about you getting ready to graduate from West Point and serve in a military healthcare system that's better than it was when your father was alive. She reached across the table, took Molly's hand. Your father used to say that the only way to honor the dead is to make sure they didn't die for nothing, to build something worth the sacrifice. I think about that every day, and I think this is worth it. The center, the legislation, the training programs, all of it. It's building something worth his sacrifice. Molly's eyes were wet. He'd be so proud of you, Mom. He'd be proud of you too, baby girl. You're everything he hoped you'd be. They finished dinner, cleaned up together, sat on the couch with tea, and talked until late into the night about West Point and medicine in the future. Eventually, Molly fell asleep, her head on Kat's shoulder like when she was small. Kat sat there in the dark apartment, her daughter sleeping beside her, and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace, not the peace of rest, the peace of purpose, the peace of knowing that she was exactly where she was supposed to be doing exactly what she was supposed to do. Declan had asked her to promise, to keep fighting, to never give up on doing what's right. She'd kept that promise, and she'd keep it tomorrow, and the day after that, and every day for as long as she had breath in her body, because some things were worth fighting for. Some things were worth losing everything for. And building a world where integrity mattered, where patients came first, where nurses could speak up without fear, that was worth everything. Catherine Brennan was 44 years old, a widow, a mother, a nurse, a director, an advocate, but most importantly, she was a fighter. And she was just getting started.